Welcome to the NYU Steinhardt Jazz Interview Series. Today we're on the campus of UCLA at the Herb Alpert School of Music with the great Kenny Burrell. Kenny, thanks so much for coming to, actually I came to you.
Well, thank you for coming here and being at UCLA, and we're happy to have you.
Well, I just want to ask you some questions about your life and your career and maybe some supporting material information you can give to everybody who's studying music and studying jazz and trying to be creative. So let's just go back a little bit. You grew up in Detroit.
Right.
And there seemed to be a lot of famous musicians or musicians who became famous that grew up in Detroit around the same time. Donald Byrd, the
Sure.
Jones Brothers, Pepper Adams, etc. Was there a reason for that? Was it because of a good school system, public schools, or?
Well, I'm sure there are reasons, and I'm sure there's more than one. I don't think there was anything directly connected to the curriculums in the schools. Although in my particular high school, which was Miller High School, there was a jazz band, a jazz stage band, and I played both guitar and upright bass in the band. And so I think that had an influence on me and others. I was already into jazz at that point anyway, but in a general sense, I don't think that there was much direct influence in the city. I think that the black community, as was in many cities, nurturing and sponsoring and enjoying jazz and blues and rhythm and blues and all of those connecting genres. And that was one of the reasons. And I think another reason, possibly, and I'm pretty sure it is that Detroit was a city where the automobile factories, etc., and the associated employment to those factories provided a certain amount of income to lower income people, whereas they could buy instruments for their children, or actually the children could buy instruments. And so in my case, the guitar, when I started playing the guitar, it was before the electric guitar. And so I bought this acoustic guitar for $10 in a pawn shop in Detroit, and that was my first instrument. And the reason that was, I was very much infatuated with the tenor saxophone in particular. And so Coleman Hawkins, Lester Young, Shoeberry, and various other people who played the saxophone, I really admired that. But this was during World War II in the early 40s, when I got this real interest to become a musician. And my father had died when I was 6 years old, so there was really no money. My mother was working a couple of jobs just to make ends meet. So there was no money for me to buy a saxophone, because saxophones were made out of metal. Metal was very important during the World War II. So I settled for the guitar, and that's how that story goes. And there's more to that story in terms of why I settled and why I continued. But to get back to your first question, I think there was an environment of just love of the music, passion for the music, which was not just in the people of my generation, but people of older generation into their parents, such as Al McKibben and Milt Jackson, those guys, and Yusuf Lateef. Those guys were of a generation before me, and this was a reflection of the passion and the love for this music in the community, particularly the black community.
Now, I posed that question because I was thinking about Pittsburgh. That's another hub that has so many great musicians. But I understood that a lot of music programs were funded by Carnegie because of what was in Carnegie and Mellon. And I was thinking maybe the same thing happened in Detroit because of the auto industry.
Not that I know of. No.
Okay.
No. If that was the case, it certainly wasn't for jazz. There could have been such a thing, but I wasn't. Number one, I wasn't aware of it, and if it was, I hadn't heard of it connected to jazz at all. But I think it comes from the heritage and the history of how this whole thing started with jazz in the United States. It grew out of the black community and kept growing and continued to grow. And that was how we had what I like to say, our own university. In other words, from this passion that we had for the music, and by the way, part of my passion started with my older brother, who was 11 years older than me. His name was Billy Burrell. He was a guitarist. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to play the saxophone, but I didn't want to, I didn't want to copy him, I wanted to do something on my own. And I watched him, and the guitar didn't seem like it was too much of a challenge, so I didn't think too much about it at certain points. But my brother's influence was exposing me to hear people like Lester Young, and because as a kid, why would I be listening to that? And it's because he was older and he was into jazz, and his friends, and they were listening to these people. This was just prior to Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie. Okay. But I was influenced by it, and Charlie Christian and so forth. So part of that passion and that interest and that developing love came from my older brother Billy initially, and then the more I listened, the more I got sucked in, and then it became a part of me. And so, back to my point about the university, all the people that you mentioned, including Flanagan, who was a real good friend of mine, and you mentioned Donald Byrd and others, we would have regular jam sessions. If it wasn't in a club, because we were too young to go in clubs anyway, so we were at someone's house or rehearsals just to try new music. We would exchange recordings and exchange original music. And one of the things that relates to education, which I try to never forget in terms of the students now that I'm teaching here at UCLA, is that there's so much available to the students now in terms of they can just press a button and it comes up on the phone, any music you want. But there's, even before that, all of the, like Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie and Coltrane solos are in print. So they can just look at that, and all of the songs are available to them in music they can look at. However, in some cases, it's too easy because it doesn't get embedded in their memory. Where I was coming up, there was not a lot of sheet music. There was hardly any sheet music for the jazz records that we heard. So, in other words, for us, and then in my case, in a particular case, friends of mine, if we had the money to buy the sheet music, it would not be harmonically, it would not be on a par with what we heard on the records. Because the jazz musicians were doing all kinds of modulations and all kinds of altered chords, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of times we wouldn't even bother. But what we did do, which was really important in terms of ear training, in terms of memory, was to transcribe the music from the recording. And we did that on a regular basis. So that was like being in school. We would transcribe the melody and the harmony as best we could, and the bass lines. So putting all that together, then you can figure out really what chord that is, rather than, going by the real book and whoever, Avisol or something. Okay, that's the way it is. Well, not necessarily so. And it also gave me a chance to compare what I heard on the recording with what somebody else might have heard on the recording, or what the sheet music said, et cetera, et cetera. And that was, in a sense, part of why I say we had our own kind of school without walls. And I'm sure it happened in more than Detroit. I'm sure it happened in, as you said, Pittsburgh and
Philadelphia, Boston, Kansas City.
Yeah, because in those days, there wasn't a lot available to you in terms of a reproduction of the sounds. But in a sense, it made us learn and get it together.
Now, what about this concept? Today, students, anyone, can go to the internet and find any song.
Right.
And they have unlimited access to everything. And in that way, they may not have a way to focus on any particular recording or style.
Right.
Now, when you were young, and I know this because it was the same for me, we had limited number of recordings.
Right.
We may have had, I had LPs. I don't know if you had 78s, but you may have had a limited number of them, so you played them to death.
Right.
And I know I talked to guys in older generations. I used to know guys like Jonah Jones, who would buy a Louis Armstrong record and wear it out, and then go and buy the same record and wear it because they loved it so much. Think about how ingrained that music becomes when you've listened to it 10,000 times, that one side.
Absolutely.
And maybe that's an issue today because we have so much. We don't even have a record store where somebody goes and says, this is a great record.
Right. Or
it's like Blue Note or ECM or whatever. Right. These are things you need to check out. Right. Nobody's really saying that today. Right. So a young kid goes to the internet, what do I listen to?
Right.
And I think that's hard. So that's why your job is important, every academic's job, teachers, to kind of direct and show people, because that's why we're here today.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely a good point. One of the things that I try to, one of the things I do tell my students, and just to think about the people that they really admire the most. And think in terms of how unique that person is, or those people are that they really admire. And my point is, if you want to make a mark in the business, if you want to become successful as a jazz player, soloist, etc., you have to find that uniqueness in you. But that's what you're admiring about this person. Mm-hmm. And everybody's different. Nobody's the same. So there is something unique about you, but that's going to have to come out in order for you to get through all of the maze. And I think that's one of the benefits that I have and the other faculty members that we have here, is that we can, because of our history, our long history, we can tell when we hear something unique. We can tell when we hear some phrases that are particularly meaningful and different from a student. And one of my jobs, and one of my jobs of joy, is to take that student and say, listen, that little thing you just played, let's talk about that. And, say that I've heard a lot of music, but this is a little thing that I think is kind of unique, and I've never. I think you might want to work on this. Let's think about what that is, and that's one of the many little things that I do here and that we do here.
Now, you say that because you've experienced that yourself. I would imagine at one point somebody may have said, you know, Kenny, you sound too much like maybe Charlie Christian.
Right.
Or something like that.
Sure.
Is that true? And
oh, yeah. When I
was there
young,
a point where you realized that and you said, I have to find my own?
Yes. And on many occasions, I found that to be, there's a certain limit to what you can do with that kind of ability. But people are waiting for the, I don't know how to put this, except it's a understood premise in jazz that you need to find your own voice.
Mm-hmm.
And until you do that, it's not gonna work. And so I had different guys at different times tell me in subtle ways, you know, I like what you're doing, but you need to get a little bit more of your own music in there. And that's what it is.
Mm-hmm. Now, taking that forward, you've been on so many records. I can't count the number of records you've been on.
Hundreds
of records.
Hundreds of jazz records and hundreds of non-jazz records as well that you may not know about.
But my question is, there's your individual sound that people recognize, but is there something that you try to play differently to expand on and to grow from record to record, from year to year? Or is it's kind of an odd question, or is there just your voice and you're overlaying it on this person's recording?
Well, I don't know if I could put it that way. In fact, it's difficult for me to speak objectively yes. about my own playing, except it's for me. There's something that has seemed to work. And the lesson comes from, well, it started with my older brother, Billy. Mm-hmm. But then the lesson is in bold letters as a lesson for all musicians in jazz and pop, et cetera, including classical. And the lesson is be yourself. Mm-hmm. And Duke Ellington, that's his. He lived that, you know. And so I'm saying all that to say that one of the things that has always seen me through, because I've been on, as you know, a huge amount of records, mm-hmm. a variety of people, you know, a huge variety of people, from Herbie Hancock to Eubie Blake, for example, mm-hmm. from Dinah Washington to Lena Horne, you know, I don't know, from et cetera, Tony Bennett to Ray Charles, mm-hmm. all kinds of stuff, you know, in between. It always works. To me, it always works if you allow your inner self to come and into play, which means a balance between head and heart, you know, a balance between your intellect and your emotions, you know. They're both working all the time, as you know, the right brain, left brain thing. Mm-hmm. And so music is not, don't get in the way of who you really are. And who we really are spiritual beings. The spiritual part of us is cool, no problem. It can make a balance. But we as this people with these brains and, you know, I guess the ego, et cetera, and fear and all that other stuff gets in the way. So I found it to work pretty well. That's why I think I've done all these records. Mm-hmm. And I've done over 100 under my name, and several hundred with jazz people, and another few hundred with people who are not even in jazz, just because I was a first call studio guy in New York for a long time.
Yes.
And so, you just go to a record date and play whatever's there. And the guy says, okay, we're on. But the point is, the other thing that I feel very fortunate about is that growing up, again, in Detroit, I was surrounded by people, beautiful people who had an appreciation for all kinds of music. Mm-hmm. Starting at home with my mother, who played the piano and liked, all kinds of music and sang in the church choir, etc. And I mentioned my brother, and then my father, he played a little banjo, a little ukulele. He had a good time. And then when I was in high school, I was lucky enough to meet with the main music instructor. His name was Luis Cabrera. He was a bass player, so he helped me learn to, I got the French bow going on or something. But also to become a conductor. So, and then he would submit me to like the all-city band, all-city orchestra, which I played not just jazz or classical music. I was in there sometimes playing cymbals or whatever, but I was exposed to all that. And then when I went to Wayne State University in Detroit, I majored in music composition. Mm-hmm. So I was exposed to Bach, Beethoven, and all that, and with an in-depth kind of listening and understanding, looking at the scores and so forth. So, and then another thing you may connect to this, in the 40s, when I was really, and even in the 30s, late 30s and 40s, on the regular AM radio, you could hear all kinds of music in one station. It wasn't just a jazz program or a blues or pop program. You could hear many different things on the same station. Mm-hmm. And I was exposed, so I developed an appreciation for all kinds of music. And I love music, but I was also developing an appreciation for different kinds of music. So that put me in very good stead when I came to New York and got all these calls from all these different kinds of artists to record with them or to perform with them. I remember doing a Perry Como show on television, Sinatra concert at Carnegie Hall, all kinds of, and a couple of the Robert Merrill record, one of the radio show, what do you call it, kind of a pop classical situation. Mm-hmm. Anyway, and I enjoyed all of that because I liked all kinds of different kinds of music. And it worked really well, except, and I'll have to, this is important, I think, because I was so versatile in terms of my ability to play different things, and so versatile in terms of my appreciation for all kinds of different things, I became too busy. Mm. And I decided this has got to change because I'm not practicing enough for what I really love, is jazz. Mm-hmm. So that's another era of my career, which we can go into if you want me to do it.
Well, I have a couple things. I'm just wondering when you first heard the next generation of innovators, like when you said before Charlie Parker. Right. So when you heard Charlie Parker, or when you first got to know John Coltrane and you played with him, one of my favorite records with Freight Train. And
thank you.
Was there an intimidation factor there? Thinking, oh my gosh, what's this guy doing? I don't know. This is another language. And I say that because I was reading an essay by Mary Lou Williams, who was talking about Monk and how he was, his intent was to create a music that couldn't be copied, that other people couldn't just take that music and copy it.
Right.
So there was math involved and practice and skill. So when Parker came around, as part of that scene, difficult to copy. So, for instance, if you wanted to jump on stage and play Back Home Again in Indiana, you hear these guys play it.
Right.
It's not an F, it's an A flat. So how many guys were stopped at the same thing when you played with Train. It's like you sound like Kenny Burrell on those records. But Train is starting to, his sheets of sound and these things. And at that point, were you thinking, do I need to play sheets of sound too?
No.
Okay, good.
No, because, as you say, that's one of your favorite records.
Yes.
And it's just a further testament to what I said earlier about be yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And it worked.
Yes.
It works because it connects the deepest part of who we are, the person who we really are, the spirit, which has a great balance on its own. It connects that and puts it out in the music. Now, when that happens, it connects to other people. That's what happens.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, but your initial question was about Charlie Parker. Okay. And I said that before Charlie Parker because I wanted to make a special point about Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie at that point, which was the latter part of the 40s, 46, yes. 47 in there. When we, that young group of musicians that you know about from Detroit, when we heard Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie, and when the guys in Philadelphia and L.A. and wherever, Pittsburgh, and Cincinnati, and you name it, we were surprised and delighted and thrilled and a whole bunch of other words at the same time. And I always say, that, in terms of hindsight, at that time, I'm saying we were just thrilled and wanted to learn all we could about this new music. But in hindsight, what he did, and Dizzy was his partner, but Bird was how can I say? He was the perfect example of what I'm about to say. He incorporated all that had gone on before. He was a great blues player, and he understood all that. And he was a voice of the present of that time, but he was also pushing the envelope for the future. And that doesn't happen. That doesn't happen too much. But what happens with all of that, that wouldn't mean anything if he didn't have the passion, if he wasn't speaking from the spirit. He was not afraid to let that happen. And with Dizzy and Bud and the people around them, that to me is one of the reasons they changed the whole sound of small group jazz, because of the intellect, the soul, and the courage that they had, courage to be who they were. That takes some courage sometimes, because you're afraid what people might say. But when the passion is strong enough, it's going to happen. It's going to happen anyway. But I was very fortunate. My friend Flanagan and I, Tommy Flanagan, we used to go and stand outside this club that Charlie Parker would come and play maybe twice a year with Miles Davis, Tommy Potter, Max Roach, and Duke Jordan.
In Detroit?
Yeah. It's called the El Sino. And we would stand there and listen in the alley. Just listen, because there was a stage door which was near the stage, so we could hear it. So I remember finally, maybe after 6 months or whatever time it was, we decided to get our nerve up and see if we could sneak in the main door. So we painted mustaches on ourselves. I don't know if we wore dark glasses or whatever, but we got away with it because it was always so crowded. So if we didn't make any kind of funny gestures, we were just standing there listening and never said anything until I got a write-up. I was in high school and I got a write-up in the paper. I was doing something and the club owner said, "I saw you in the paper. Get out of here." He said, "You're not young enough to be. You're not old enough to be in it." But the other thing is, before that happened, though, I got my nerve up to ask Charlie Parker, can you believe this, if I could sit in with them. And you know what he said? Yes. So, of course, I knew the song because we had all those records, and I knew all the lines and so forth. And I knew the chords because, like I say, we did our own transcription. We didn't need music. We just transcribed all those songs. We knew them. So I sat in, and I think just one time I did, but he allowed it. I didn't want to push it. And I played a couple of songs with the band, and he was very encouraging to me. He was so modest himself, but he was very, he sounded really nice, keep up the good work, that kind of thing. But it was really an enjoyable experience.
Do you remember what you played?
No, it's probably something like Dewey Square. I don't know. It's a couple of songs, probably. But they were recording at that time, and it was really something. And I remember, see, the attitude about those guys. They were, and we have the same attitude here with my musicians, and they encourage people who we feel have talent. We say, "Oh, just push them a little bit more so that stuff can keep coming out." So I remember one tune, I was playing, and the bass player, Tommy Potter, was standing in back of me. So for whatever reason, I don't know if the chord was a G or whatever. So he played the open strings with his right hand. And he reached over and put his finger on my two lower strings. And I kept playing. And he just did that and stopped. I mean, he just did that and then went on to play his bass. So I had thought about that for a while. And then it dawned on me. What he was telling me with just that little gesture, that I was not using all the strings. That there's 6 strings, not 4. And so that kind of thing, but was helpful. But it showed the attitude of Tommy Potter and the other people.
Pull everybody up.
Yeah, and and when I played with John Coltrane the first time, it was with Dizzy, as you know, with Dizzy's small group in Detroit. They were working in Detroit, and I worked with them for a month. And Train was trying to get it. He had just left Earl Bostic's band, something like that. So he was not the Train that everybody knew. We were all, but that was an experience in itself. Would you like me to talk about that a little bit?
Sure.
Well, the reason I think it could be meaningful in terms of people who want to know about my career and about guitar, etc., is that there was no piano in that group. The week before, or a couple of weeks before, for various reasons, or whatever reasons, the drummer was not, they had to get a new drummer, and they had to get, they replaced the saxophone player, another saxophone player. Okay. So, for some reason, I got the call. I got a call from Dizzy Gillespie.
But had there been a guitar player in the band before?
No.
Okay.
And so, they would. What happens is Dizzy and Milt Jackson were playing alternate on piano when they weren't solo. So, I suspect, and in fact, I never even asked Milt this. I suspect that the reason I got the call was because Milt suggested Dizzy call me, because Milt knew me. You know, he was working with Dizzy, but Milt knew me from Detroit, being from Detroit himself, the same high school, and we used to jam together before he left. So anyway, the point was, I'm excited about this. I'm 19 now. And so I go to work with them, and I'm nervous, of course. And I meet these guys, and so the great thing about Dizzy, he was such a psychologist. He always was telling jokes, you know. He was always doing funny things, and so he would be on the stage, you understand, telling a joke or something. And next thing I know, he's counting the tempo off. So I didn't have time to get nervous. I'm laughing, and all of a sudden, bang, time to go. And so it was a wonderful experience. I remember framing my first paycheck from something. It was a pay envelope, not a paycheck. Anyway, two things about that gig were important. I made my first recording with them, Tintin Dale and Burke's Works, in a label in Detroit, which Dizzy partly owned, called DG, with Dave Usher, DG Records. So that was a huge lift for me to say I, recorded with Dizzy, and Dizzy said he liked it, and he played it for some people in New York, and they liked it. So I'm feeling really, really good about it. But in that month, Coltrane and I became friends because we were near age, and so we remained friends, you know. And then the other thing significant about, well, two things. That was the first time Dizzy had a group with no piano, and the guitar was playing the chordal area for the group. And that worked out fine. But that worked out fine for me because I had been used to doing that with the guitar, bass, drum trio that I had in Detroit anyway, which was technically the first one in the States, or maybe in the world, I don't know. But the point is, that worked out okay. And Dizzy liked it, and so he, as you know, he kept that format, not all the time, but he kept it a lot for the rest of his life with just guitar and no piano. The other thing about that particular situation was the recording itself. I've been told that that record, Tintin Dale, which had Latin percussion on it, was one of the first Latin jazz entries, into what we know now as Latin jazz. And as you know, Dizzy was a pioneer in Latin jazz,
It was Chano Pozo in the band?
No, he wasn't there. But, he was around that, but he wasn't in Detroit on that gig.
I think he wrote that song.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, he and Dizzy.
Yeah. But
I'm saying it's, that's historically thought of as one of the first. And Dizzy is one of the people who explored with Bowser, Mauro Bowser, and that explored because Dizzy loved the Afro Cuban beat and Latin sounds. And so I was, later on, I didn't realize, but I was very fortunate to be on that for that reason. But more to me would be on a date with Dizzy and Coltrane and Percy Heath and Bill Jackson. So that worked out all right. And he wanted me to go on the road with him, but I didn't go because my mother said, no, you better get something to back up. She knew that the music business was pretty shaky, so she encouraged me to finish college.
One of the few at that time. So do you think your tunes like Chili Con Carne were influenced all the way back from that?
You mean in terms of?
In terms of style and interest in looking at different genres too?
Well, I don't know exactly. I can't make a, what do you call it, a definitive connection to the thing I did with Dizzy and Chili Con Carne. I can't make that. All I know is that I had been working with Ray Barretto on many recordings, particularly with Gene Ammons and others, who he was playing the conga drum, and I liked that sound. As you know, we both recorded with Gene Ammons a few times, but Ray Barretto did a lot of on Savoy and I guess it was Dial and so forth.
Prestige. Was it Prestige?
Yeah, Prestige. So the point is, I like that sound, and then I had been working with Stanley Turrentine a lot with Dizzy Gillespie. I mean, with Jimmy Smith. So at this point, as I told you before, I had decided I wanted to cut back on all these record dates I was doing and start working on growing the ideas I had in my head and my technique, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I got a call in 1960 to do a Broadway show from Elliot Lawrence, who was conducting. He had a jazz band, et cetera.
Right, in Philadelphia.
He was venturing into being a Broadway conductor. So he said, you wanted to get the guys, get the jazz guys, as many as he could in there. And he said, all I want you to do is send me a good sub, and you can take off and do, what you want to do. And I did, and a lot of us did, because I did a lot of those records with Jimmy Smith when I was working on Broadway. They just sent a sub in and went and did that. But the thing is, I'm saying all that. I did that for 3 years. Did Bye Bye Birdie and How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying. That was those 3 years worth of Broadway. But the thing about that, the benefit of that was, besides having a regular paycheck, was the fact that I had time to practice. I had a regular schedule, and I could practice a lot. I could read a lot. I could write a lot, and I could think a lot. And after maybe a month or so, you're doing the same show. You don't even have to open the music. You know it. Know what the song. You know the notes. So two of the things that came out of that position, if I may, was that Midnight Blue record you're talking about.
I love it.
Okay, that was visualized while I was working in the pit band. I started because Alfred Lyons and I were, Blue Note Records.
Right.
So I was supposed to do a record for him. So I started thinking what I was going to do. So I began to think about it, and I started getting these songs together, and I could hear Stanley Turrentine, I could hear the conga drum with Ray, and I was already working with Major Holly and Bill English on a regular basis, so they knew all of my little moves and stuff, both without piano and sometimes with piano, but many times with just a bass, drums, and guitar. So I thought that would be a nice idea for the record. Then I started to write some tunes. And the tunes came out mostly to be blues songs. It's a little bit of variation. You know, Midnight Blue itself is not quite a blues, but you know, a lot of it had that blues feeling. That's why it's called Midnight Blue, by the way. And I think the only one I put on there was G Baby Ain't I Good to You. That was not mine. And I don't know why, it just popped in my head. So I'm not going to fight that little spiritual arrow coming in there. So I just put it in there. The point is, it became. That's why the instrumentation, because that's what I heard. Mm-hmm. It became my best-selling album of all the ones I've ever done.
I didn't know that. And
yeah, it's the best, and it was reissued as a favorite of Rudy Van Gelder, you know. And this is something else you may not know. It became the favorite album of Alfred Lyons of all the records he ever made. That shocked me, and this was told to me by his wife and a couple other people. It was buried on his grave in New York. And I said, "Why did he ever tell you why he liked it?" She said, "Yeah, he told me several things about it." He said, "But one of the things that stood in my mind was that," he said, "every note swung." And as you've talked to musicians, maybe you have talked to them, maybe not talked to them, but Alfred Lyons was very adamant about the music swinging. He was wanted the music to swing, and one of the favorite sayings that we always kind of talk about it behind his back was that he would say in his German accent, "It's not swinging, it's not swinging," and he was right. But the other thing I couldn't figure out at the time, and I'm still a little bit unsure on it, is that, and not unsure, I'm just a little bit puzzled. Because, as I said earlier, most of the songs on that record are blues. There's a couple of the kind of bluesy. And musicians that I respect, you know, great jazz musicians say they love the album. Mm-hmm. So at the time, I said, how could they love the album? It's just basically a blues album. And then the more older I have gotten, it all connects to that thing I mentioned to you about spirit, which means it doesn't matter what song it is, it's what comes out from within. Mm-hmm. And so, obviously, something came out from within on my part, and it connected to other people. One thing that might be a clue to what I'm talking about is that was the only time that I ever made up a song on the spot, and it was recorded, and it's on the record. I told Rudy, I was just sitting there, you know, we're kind of waiting for something. And I started fooling around with something. And I said, maybe, I don't know if I had in mind that maybe he should catch it before I lose the theme or the phrases or something. I just said, Rudy, turn the machine on. He did. And I just started to play, and I continued to play, and I finished it. And it's a tune on there called Soul Lament. Mm-hmm. That's the only time I've ever done that. And it seemed to work okay. In fact, I've gotten some emails from classical guitarists who want the music to that to put in their repertoire, you know. Mm. And, you know, I tell them, why don't you transcribe it? Like we had to do. But anyway, one more thing about sitting in the pit band. The other thing, I had this huge to me, because I had to work on it pretty good, huge opportunity and deal, commission, not a commission, but a record opportunity with Verve with Creed Taylor,
Mm-hmm.
who wanted me to do what turned out to be Guitar Forms with Gil Evans.
Mm-hmm.
So that one, he said, well, I want you to, because I had done all kinds, like I mentioned to you earlier about, I did all these various kinds of record dates. I did the stuff from Brazil for him with the Joe Beam,
Mm-hmm.
not Carlos, but the young lady.
Astrid.
Yeah,
Gilberto.
that one and a few others, and I did with Kay Winding, these surfing records and
Mm-hmm.
all kinds of stuff. So he knew I could do all these different things. So he said, I want you to do a record that would showcase all these different things you can do. I said, well, I'd like maybe try that because I do like a lot of different things, And I said, well, I thought about it, and I said, the only reservation is I don't want it just to be some kind of like display of different styles. I want each song to be meaningful in itself. In other words, I want it to be art and not just, fluff.
Mm-hmm.
So he said, okay. And so he said, who do you want to work with? I said, well, I'd like to get Gil Evans because he did all these different things with Miles. And I had also done a couple of records with Gil Evans before anyway, so we were friends. So we did it. And Creed was complaining about Gil being so slow. I said, don't bother him. What he's done, it's going to be great. So we did it, but I worked pretty hard on it because I did classical stuff. I don't know if you know the record or not, but
I know the
Guitar
Gil
Forms.
record. Yes.
I had classical, I had blues, I had jazz, I had Latin, the whole gamut. And that one was the first Grammy nomination I ever got. Mm-hmm. And it was the one who got all these great reviews. And so between the two records, Midnight Blue and Guitar Forms, I was able to become a band leader. In other words, take a band, go somewhere and play in a club or a concert, and people pay admission to come to see you. But before that, I was just a busy side man. But yes. Those guys, those two records, put me over to the next level where I could, have a band.
Kenny, I want to thank you again. You're a warm and generous person for giving us your time today.
You're very welcome. Nice to meet you and be with you.